Hello, my name is Jason Dake, and welcome to my Performance Assessment Development presentation, Assignment 3 for EDU Assessing and Managing Learning. Through the Common Core State Standards Initiative, K-12 Learning Standards, and the development of language arts and techniques through reading and media literacy, students must use reading and comprehension skills while critically thinking and solving real-world problems. Students must examine essay topic structures by explaining how everything comes together for an explanation and interpretation using words, images, graphics, and sounds to gain or impact meaning. The students will use earlier standards to apply greater depth and increasingly significant text. Students should evaluate any changes in formality and tone to discover the audience and the purpose. Students will convert this knowledge into an essay for the product learning target. This process allows for a broad range of topics to be researched, discussed among students, and provides students' interest-driven learning. The learning targets for assessments are knowledge, reasoning, skill learning, and product learning. For knowledge, we must know, define, understand, identify, list, and explain. Students are to determine the knowledge or understanding required to become competent on this standard. Students will use comprehension skills to define, list, identify, comprehend, and explain the story or text. Students will determine and identify the formality of the story and text. Students will also determine and identify the tone and shifts of the story or text. For reasoning, we must predict, infer, summarize, compare, analyze, and classify. Students apply reasoning to be competent on this standard by analyzing tone, words, and formality. Students will also analyze image, words, graphics, and sounds. Additionally, students will infer the purpose and audience of the text. Students will predict, summarize, compare, and classify the characters' events, tones, and formalities of the story or text. For skill learning, we must demonstrate, pronounce, perform, and evaluate. Students are to apply skill learning to demonstrate competence on the standard. Students will evaluate changes in formality and tone. Students will also evaluate several aspects and dimensions of the story or text. Additionally, students will evaluate the effects of the audience and the purpose. Students may be required to pronounce or perform storylines or text from the story or the text. In product learning, we see creating, designing, writing, and drawing. The product target categorizes learning in classifications of artifacts. The writing, creation, design, and drawings of the essay product focus on the learning targets. The specifications for the quality of the products are the focus of teaching and assessment. The student-friendly template brings us the recognition of goals, roles, audiences, procedures, products, and performance. For goals, the students will identify a specific writing skill to focus on and support resources to achieve the goal. The students will explore characteristics of the story and text to determine the character's tone and formality to meet the essay's writing skills. The student is to focus on how to incorporate and cite the resources to become an influential writer. The student will establish a reasonable plan, and the plan becomes achieved promptly, and the plan will break down into a step-by-step process. For the role of the teacher and the student plays a significant part in target for assessment concerning literacy and reading. Educators continuously monitor and support the progress and accomplishments of the student. Students will develop reading and writing stamina, develop a sense of responsibility, and become motivated to complete their assignments. Through the shared reading of resources, the students can develop their roles in connecting, illustrating, and distributing, and reading and writing with those roles. It is beneficial for the instructor to remember their place in the classroom. For the audience, as quoted by EndNote 2021, page 1, an audience is a group of readers who read a particular piece of writing. While there are 3 types of audiences, we will focus on the academic audience. The most important audience at this point would be the teacher, because he or she would be reading the essay. And it is important to understand the discipline of the teacher and what their approach is to discipline. The classroom can also be a part of the audience if the writer is effective in getting a molded response from the class through their writing. For procedure, the student will develop procedures such as defining, comparing, and contrasting essay topics, researching problems or sources, listing the traits when comparing 2 entities, developing thesis statements, creating drafts and editing, researching reports, and creating posters, PowerPoints, presentations, models, articles, and brochures, as well as following all policies. For product and performance, the student must finish the product with the ability to read or demonstrate the essay in clear writing. The student must have the ability to understand the organizational settings and assignments, analyze the facts, provide solutions, and provide recommendations, correctly interpret situations to form the essay, provide alternative solutions and evaluations, perform the amount of work and the timeliness of completion, have accuracy, thoroughness, and the neatness of the product, have oral expression to present themselves clearly, have written expression in a logical and sequential manner, and have good grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure. The rubric for performance task assessment presents 4 levels of performance and 3 categories: content, evidence, and clarity. On level 4, for content, the product is clearly written or read. Significant and appropriate resources, evidence, or materials support the product, and the materials supply correct details. For evidence, the materials and resources offer support. Information is organized, logical, and concise. The flow is thorough from the introduction, transition, and connection of all materials that allow audiences to follow easily. For clarity, grammar and usage are free of error, and minor errors do not interfere with the message of the essay. Language and wording are highly effective and implement meaning to the essay. Style and word choice are appropriate. On level 3, for content, the product is written and is clear. Adequate and appropriate resources, evidence, or materials support the product. Most materials are relevant, and most details are correct and minor, but do not interfere with the points of the essay. For evidence, on level 3, the materials and resources offer support, but not all connections are explained. Information is not entirely organized, logical, or concise. The flow is rough from the introduction, transition, and connection of materials. For clarity on level 3, some errors and minor errors do not interfere with the message of the essay. Language and wording are, for the most part, practical and implement meaning to the essay. On level 2, the product for content, the product is written or read, is somewhat unclear. Some appropriate resources, evidence, or materials support the product. Some materials are relevant. Some details are lacking. Some evidence is inaccurate or insufficient. For level 3 on evidence, the materials and resources offer support, but no connections are explained. Information is not entirely organized, logical, or concise. The flow is rough and lacking from the introduction, transition, and connection of materials. For clarity on Level 2, major grammar and usage are not free of error, and minor errors begin to interfere with the message of the essay. Simple, bland, and not practical, and implement little or no meaning to the essay or is not appropriate. For content on Level 1, the product is written or read is unclear. Most of the material is irrelevant to the topic. The essay is lacking in details and insufficient sources are provided. For evidence on Level 1, the information is not organized, logical, and concise. The information does not flow, and the information is not sequential or related. For clarity on Level 1, major grammatical issues make the meaning unclear, and language and wording are ineffective and offer no meaning to the essay. In this slide, we have the assessment critique summary. Our first key would be able to make sure the assessments serve a clear and appropriate purpose. According to the Common Core State Standards Initiative, there is a clear and appropriate purpose by comparing and contrasting characters or information in the story or text, as well as assessing and evaluating the growth of the students by formative assessments. In key number 2, the assessment reflects valued achievement targets because of the knowledge, reasoning, skill learning, and product learning. For knowledge, students can now identify, define, and write between the levels of formality to determine the expectations of the audience and the purpose. And in reasoning, students can now analyze the tones, words, diction, and formality because it is important to know the types of tones and how they relate to the writer's voice. For skill learning, the students can now evaluate interactions of different techniques in formality and tone across the audiences, as well as the objectivity of each presentation. And for product learning, we have a quote from UK DIS 2019, page 1. Reflection is the key to self-assessment. Student development skills are able to identify their strengths, weaknesses, and areas which need to improve. For key 3, we have design. By using self and assumative testing, it can monitor and track the student's performance through an analysis sheet and a rubric to define the task of the project and guide the student to completing the project. All components need to be neat, organized, and completed promptly. By incorporating scaffolding strategies, students receive the support they need to help them complete the task. Key 4 is communication. All participants, in the interest of the student, will have the advantage of communication with the educator. One form of communication with the student will be through the rubric. Tasks can be shared with the parents through the use of the rubric so they can see at what level the student is progressing. Through this level-by-level process on the rubric, the students can track and monitor their given points and evaluation from the start of the school year to the finish. The analysis sheet and the rubric can work hand in hand for self-assessments. The last key of our assessment critique summary is key number 5, student involvement. Student involvement becomes manageable when the self-assessment and rubrics break down into different categories. Students can perform a self-assessment from the rubric on how well they performed and compare it to the form filled out by the educator. The students can base their growth on the graded levels of the rubric. Andre 2000 explains that this process will also allow the student to improve and reflect upon their performance while leaving room for improvement. The students will be allowed to ask necessary questions about the grades or the rubric task and understand where they are in the process.